Hello, I'm Maciej Mikos and you're watching World Talks. European Union countries are preparing for winter. After resigning from Russian gas and oil, the energy systems of the EU countries had to switch to different sources of energy. New proposals for the European Union's energy strategy were presented on Tuesday at a meeting in Luxembourg. But the question arises whether the West has done enough to avoid blackouts and power shortages this very year. And to discuss the issue, we're joined by Ivana Stradner, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you for accepting it. Now, so has Europe learned from the lessons of the past 2 years of Russian aggression on Ukraine, and how well is it prepared for the upcoming winter?
Today, indeed, European Union, they had a meeting regarding the energy. And as you have mentioned, they have been discussing on how to prepare for a winter. Because make no mistake, energy is one of the most powerful weapons coming from Russia. Because Putin understands very much that Europe still depends on Russian energy, even though, like, for the past 2 years, many countries have made a firm decision to divorce from Russian energy. They are still very much dependent on LNG. So that's something to be noted, and that's something we should absolutely do not discard, because Putin has been known for using energy to blackmail Europe. We already saw what happened with Germany and why we are where we are right now for many years, being dependent on Russian gas. I want to emphasize a tremendously important thing, which is that if you look back, and if you, for example, take a look at the latest Russian targets, and actually since summer, Putin has been targeting specifically energy sector, in particular power plants in Ukraine. And that is because Putin wants to make sure to incite all those fears inside Ukraine about that Ukraine is going to freeze this winter. And that has been Putin's long propaganda, both in Ukraine, but also in the West. And I would love to talk more about that. But let me go back to the moment discussing what he has been doing in Ukraine since summer. So basically, his military has been targeting specifically power plants, making sure that we do not have time in the West to help Ukraine reboost and repair power plants before.
And here comes my question precisely. Can the EU, can the West in general do anything about it? Because these attacks on Ukrainian energy infrastructure are well part of an everyday landscape in Ukraine these days, right?
Absolutely, and that's why it's really past time for Europe, but also the US and the West writ large to act together and to help Ukraine preventively, to try to recover some of the power plants that were destroyed this summer before winter, but also to supply Ukraine with other tools and with other things that they need to survive this winter. Because that's something that Putin is counting on, to put a pressure on Zelensky that a lot of people in Ukraine, what he loves to talk about, they're going to freeze, and then to increase the number of refugees, so the Ukrainians actually flee Ukraine to Europe, and then to cause a migration crisis. Before we started our discussion, you were showing about immigration crisis across the West, and that's something we really need to link, because we know very, very well how Putin operates, that also migration is something, refugees is something that he has been using as a weapon, and his goal is definitely this winter to make sure that many Ukrainians actually leave the country by out of fear of being frozen. And having said that, let me also explain what he has been doing also in Europe. Basically, in the Western Europe, he has been pushing that agenda that Europe is going to freeze because Europe is not helping itself. Instead, they are helping Ukraine, and because of the Russian war in Ukraine, apparently they are punishing themselves by not buying and being dependent on Russian gas. So we know, that has been Russian influence operation since 2022, and we should definitely not fall for that. However, this winter, we know Putin's tricks, and we really need to put its act together before winter. And my third point that I also want to emphasize, make no mistake, there will be elections in Moldova in a few days. And that's also another vulnerability that Putin has been trying to exploit when it comes to the energy in Moldova. So that's also another area that we should be paying attention to.
But if I'm not mistaken, the EU has been able to secure energy for Moldova in the past. Can it do it again?
Absolutely, and that's exactly my point, that Europe has helped Moldova tremendously, and they should continue in that direction, because that's another area that Putin is going to exploit later this fall, early winter, also in Moldova.
Right. Now, we know that the geopolitical landscape of Europe has, well, of the world, has changed dramatically after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and therefore now the EU is seeking a common, well, long-lasting energy security. Now, what are the benefits and the risks of such a, common energy policy?
Well, as I mentioned, it has been known that Putin has been using energy to blackmail Europe. And even though a lot of European countries have divorced from Russian gas, they are still very much dependent on LNG. And that's why several countries have actually requested more reporting on LNG and Russia. So that's number one thing, because we also saw like what happened with Germany and with Nord Stream, and how Russia has been using that as a weapon for a long time, actually, to make sure that Germany is actually dependent on Russian gas. And when you have to make a cost-benefit analysis when it comes to protecting your own people versus doing something, in international relations / international security, before 2022, Germany was definitely not aware, regardless of many countries in the West, including the United States, where I'm from, where I'm sitting right now. We've been warning Germany about that. So my concern also for the later, of the year, that Russia might exploit a very similar strategy when it comes to LNG. Look, the divorce from Russian energy is going to take a long time. It's not an easy.
Well, according to the European Commission, by 2027. EU countries will be able to completely abandon the supply of Russian fossil fuels. The question is here whether Hungary and Slovakia will allow it to happen.
Exactly. And that's precisely, first of all, 2027, and, it's like almost 3 years from now. Who knows, what can happen since then, and how Russia can actually benefit and use that to blackmail the West. And you mentioned Hungary. I mean, we know very well that Orban has been one of those pro-Russian / populist leaders who have benefited tremendously from the Kremlin, and who has also been using that also as a weapon to Europe, because he's the one who loves to escalate and then de-escalate the crisis, and then to position himself in the European Union as the only one who can solve the crisis. He actually escalated. So that's also another area that he may use, to blackmail Europe when it comes to energy sector.
Yes, well, we know that still Europe partly is dependent on Russian fossil fuels, but some data has been published lately on the EU websites, and I read here that the share of EU gas imports coming from Russia has diminished from 45% in 2021 to 15% in 2023. Now, is this a success, a partial success, or is the EU not working as it should because it's still 15% of gas from Russia?
Definitely in a better position than we were like 2 years ago, but it's still a long way to go, as you have mentioned, 2027. Also, that's why I want to emphasize the role of LNG and something that Russia has been also using as a weapon, because there is also data published by Deutsche Welle that Russia is now the EU's second biggest LNG supplier. And that's also something that we should be paying attention to and how Russia might exploit. And the second point that I also want to make, there are certain countries that are more or less, dependent on Russian gas. Those countries that are more dependent, Putin is known to use them, including Hungary or including Serbia, as a weapon, against the Western Europe. So we have to really perceive this in a more holistic way. And we really have to understand that energy is something Russia has been using as a weapon. This is not just some energy supplies. This is truly a weapon that Russia has been using for its military purposes, for its imperialistic objectives. So that's something that we should absolutely not undermine. Because that's something how Russia thrives. That's exactly how Russia has been blackmailing the West for the past few years, in particular, if not even decades. And that's why we should absolutely not be naive when it comes to Russia using gas as a weapon.
And whoever thought that it may also backfire at Russia, that Russia losing the European markets would somehow stop the Russian war machine has been sadly mistaken. That's the sad truth of it. Ivana Stradner, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, was our guest tonight. Thank you very much. Always a pleasure.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you. And thank you for watching. That is all for now, and stay with us for much more here on TVP World.